Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. The continuing Brexit saga. Is Boris Johnson a friend or foe of democracy? And another saga, Russiagate. Is there a two-tiered justice system, one for the protected and one for the rest of us? Cross-talking some real news. I'm joined by my guest, Glenn Deason. He is a professor at the Higher School of Economics, as well as author of The Decay of Western Civilization and Resurgence of Russia. We also have Dmitry Babich. He's a political analyst and editor at Inosami Internet Media Project. And in London, we cross to Marcus Papadopoulos. He's the editor of Politics First magazine. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Let me go to London first here. Let's talk about Boris Johnson. I asked in my intro, is he a friend or foe of democracy, because some people are making very strong arguments on both sides of that proposition. Go ahead, Marcus.
Well, these are exceptional times for Britain, the likes of which the country has not experienced since the Second World War. And Brexit, which is a Gordian knot, has claimed the scalps of two British prime ministers, David Cameron and Theresa May. And there is no reason as to why Brexit could not end up claiming the scalp of Boris Johnson. However, what is different now is that Boris Johnson has pledged, has promised to deliver Brexit with or without a deal by or on the 31st of October. Now, people are criticising him at Westminster for his suspension of Parliament. They're claiming it's undemocratic. Well, on the one hand, in the context that Britain is a parliamentary democracy, yes, you could make that argument. But on the other hand, a prime minister in the UK has the power to suspend Parliament. Also, the deadlock, the impasse over Brexit has to be broken, because it is unacceptable for the UK economy to go into 2020 with Brexit still lingering. And let me add this as well, Peter, regarding the politicians at Westminster who are claiming that Boris Johnson is acting in an undemocratic way. This is what I say to them, and indeed, once Parliament returns from the summer recess, I will be saying this to them. To the ones in the House of Lords, Labour and Conservative, who are accusing the Prime Minister of being undemocratic, well, what audacity they have, because members of the House of Lords have not been elected. They are appointed. and to members of the House of Commons who are accusing Boris Johnson of being undemocratic, I say this to them. When they took their seats in the Commons, they swore an oath of allegiance to the Queen. Well, excuse me, the head of the British state, the Queen, has not been elected. So this argument that Boris Johnson is acting in an undemocratic way can be turned on the very people who are accusing him of being undemocratic.
Exactly. Glenn, I mean, again, irrespective if you like Boris Johnson's tactics, I will even agree they're a bit devious, okay? But it's within the bounds of law and tradition here. And as Marcus quite correctly pointed out, Brexit has claimed two scalps prime ministers. Boris Johnson now is, and I think he's saying, the people voted for Brexit. I am here to implement it, because the last two were unable or unwilling to do it. And he is doing the people's will, okay? Has nothing to do with circumventing democracy.
No. Well, they are claiming that this does not have anything to do with Brexit. I don't believe that. So I do think he's very devious.
Come on, politics is synonymous with being, devious. Okay, I think that's fair. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, but it is a good question whether or not this is democratic, because what he's effectively doing now is he's sidelining a parliament because that parliament is trying to undermine or reverse a referendum. So
yeah, but the same parliament couldn't decide on how to move forward. Enough of this parliament. I mean, they can't move it forward, okay? We've proven that. To ask Theresa May, I wonder if she's out with Hillary Clinton in the woods taking a walk, okay? No, something has to be done. Go ahead.
And I think that's, where this problem has always had the same root. That is, the people voted for Brexit. However, Parliament was overwhelmingly Remain. So this is where we've been now. So yes, Marcus is correct. Britain is a parliamentary democracy. That is, usually sovereignty rests with Parliament. However, in a referendum, you hand over sovereignty to the people, allow them to make the decision. But when they made the wrong decision, Parliament decided to take back control. So whether or not for or against Brexit, you have to recognize it's a bit controversial to take back that decision making. And what Boris Johnson now is trying to do is essentially cut off Parliament because, they're trying to. How he overturned the market.
But the Parliament had its chance. Two prime ministers had their chance. Dima, go ahead.
Well, I think it's just a travesty when people voted at a referendum, 3 years have passed and nothing has been done. And then, in order to fulfill the will of the people, to fulfill the referendum, the Parliament is being suspended. So I just had a look before coming here. I had a look at an article by Boris Johnson for The Telegraph that he penned on June the 30th this year, objecting to Putin's criticism of liberalism. And the article is headline, "We will prove Vladimir Putin wrong by leaving the EU by October 31st. I think, according to the news, the Telegraph should redefine this headline as, "We will prove Vladimir Putin right by suspending the parliament until October the 14th. And just one quote from this article from Boris Johnson. "Oh, Vladimir, but there are some countries where capitalism is believed to be in the hands of oligarchs, and very few, where journalists have been shot and where liberal values are derided." Well, I can respond to that there is a country where referendums are not fulfilled, where for years the destiny, not fulfilled for years, where the destiny of the generally elected parliament is in the hands of an individual with fluffy hair, who was not elected by the general vote, and where actually journalists are being actually transferred to prison from foreign embassies where they take refuge. That's a good answer to this article.
Okay, let me go back to Marcus. One of the interesting things here is there's still time. I guess there's in total about 5 sitting days for Parliament to actually do something to react legally. I mean, either they have to get a new law or a new government. Both are very unlikely here. The interesting thing is how is Brussels, particularly the Germans, reacting to this, because they have believed all along that there'd be either a second referendum or the Article 50 would be revoked, okay? But now they have to sit up straight and listen to Boris Johnson, because if he's putting it out there, a deal is still possible, though it's rather unlikely, but it's incumbent upon the Europeans now to face up to the tactic that they've been using is not coming to fruition, and it's not going to work out the way they wanted. What about this European angle? Go ahead, Marcus.
Well, I am no friend to the European Union.
Me neither.
But I have to be fair. There is nothing else the European Union can do. The European Union and Theresa May put together a withdrawal agreement. It wasn't great, but it wasn't bad. It was okay. And British industry and British business said so. So there is nothing else that Brussels can do. The ball is firmly in the court of London now. Boris Johnson's survival as Prime Minister depends solely on delivering Brexit by or on the 31st of October. He was propelled to power by the Brexiteers in the Conservative Party. If he does not deliver Brexit, then they will bring him down. So I cannot see how Boris Johnson will secure a deal with the European Union. It is now more than likely that Britain will exit the European Union with no deal. The main issue is the Irish backstop. Now, the EU is not going to give any more concessions on that. I understand that. But Boris Johnson is not going to give any concessions on that. And one of the reasons is because if he gave a concession on the Irish backstop, then he risks losing the support of the DUP in the Commons. And one way the opposition could bring down the Conservative government of Boris Johnson is holding a vote of no confidence. Because as it stands, the government would win because of the 10 DUP MPs.
Well, I want to stay with the European angle here, Glenn. What do you think the possibilities are? Because I think there's a little bit of room there.
Yeah, no. On this point, I would disagree slightly with Marcus, because I don't think the Brexit deal by Theresa May was particularly good. So I thought it was voted down 3 times for
good reasons.
For good reasons. And part of the reason is once Britain said, OK, we're going to take no deal off the table, and Parliament effectively committed itself to we're going to block it no matter what, that sent a very clear signal to the EU, which is, now it's either we can either give them a deal, an awful deal, or no deal, or not necessarily an awful deal, but a deal that works more in the EU's favor. So obviously in Berlin and Brussels now, they had the impression that, Brexit's not going to go through, at least no deal, because Parliament will find a way to stop it. So I think once...
They've miscalculated,
Well,
Glenn.
Yeah, they didn't see, Boris here, but I'm not sure. Well, so I think that they're panicking a bit more now.
Good. This is a language I want to hear.
So perhaps they're more willing to try to find some compromise. But where I would agree with Marcus, of course, is that the EU has boxed itself in a little bit as well, because they've been insisting that there is no way to compromise over Ireland. There can't be any other deal, and essentially they all.
But if there's going to be a deal, let me go to Dima. If there's going to be a deal, I say the ball is in the European court right now. Go ahead.
Well, I think that it's again chicken coming home to roost. The EU has been using brutal tactics with so many countries until now, and it always worked out. So they're so used to not having a compromise that it will be the first time in many years.
Always expecting the other guy to blink.
Exactly, and that's what Zero Hedge writes in their comment. They write that the EU has got so used to having the other side blinking first that they're simply unable to compromise. Maybe Boris Johnson's brutal strategy may bring some results.
He's mimicking the Europeans.
One of the variants, again, I'm quoting Zero Hedge here, is for the UK to pay the Brexit bill, the terrible Brexit bill, in return for a trade arrangement. Well, basically, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the situation before the Ukrainian civil war. How it was basically brought to the point of civil war by the EU, because the whole problem was...
On that note, we're going to have to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on some real news. Staying with RT.
I am sure that we need to stop it from continuing to grow. I just never felt very good about the idea of bringing children into the world, because I didn't feel like things were in very good shape, that life was just going to be a lot of suffering for them.
There's no reason to bring more kids into the world. You take things that already need love and give them love. There's no reason to make something else that you need to give your love to.
Everybody's scared to talk about it. Survival is truly dependent on us addressing this issue. And if we can't even talk about it, if we can't even have a conversation about it, then we're in trouble.
Who dares, thinks. We dare to ask.
Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing some real news. Okay, Glenn, in my introduction at the start of the program, I talked about the saga of Brexit. Now we have the saga of Russiagate. What is Russiagate now? Because we have the Mueller report, no collusion, okay? But it still has a life of its own, and it doesn't seem to be going away. What accounts for that?
Well, it's a good question. Also, much like Brexit, it's been going on now for almost 3 years, and it doesn't seem to go away, even after Mueller pretty much disappeared from the news. Keep in mind, he was the hero of the resistance. He was, the one who's going to bring Trump down, everyone in handcuffs. And now we see this isn't really panning out, and now he disappeared. So why are they still holding on to it? I think because it's been almost 3 years now, and they decided to completely go after Trump. They didn't challenge his policies, his ideas.
And that's their biggest mistake.
So they just went after him. And what was the main thing? Oh, well, he's an agent of the Kremlin. So effectively, everyone had to go against Trump, and the resistance focused on him being a Russian agent. So everyone has fallen in line. Everyone has bought into this. The problem is we're not tough enough on Russia. You can't sit down with them. So essentially criminalizing diplomacy. And now they all put themselves in this one position. And even though it turns out, the story was a flop, how do you reverse 3 years of this nonsense? So
I've said that on this program so many times when we go to Marcus, is that sometimes it's impossible to take back words that you say because you use them with such force, and you just don't want to admit that you're wrong. I mean, the interesting thing here is that you have Jim Comey, the former FBI director, essentially given a slap on the wrist, and his associates around him may not be as lucky because we have more investigation into the investigators. But the remarkable thing is that you have the assistant director of the FBI, Andy McCabe. He's under investigation, but now he's a contributor at CNN. James Clapper is. Others are contributors with the mainstream media. I mean, they continue to want to control the narrative in a fact-free environment. Go ahead, Marcus.
Well, hostility towards Russia, suspicion of Russia, racism towards Russians hasn't been going on for 3 years. It's been going on in the West for hundreds of years. Yeah. If you have a look at Hansard, which records all discussions in the House of Commons, in the House of Lords, if you go back to the 1600s, to the 1700s, to the 1800s, it's almost identical to the language that's coming out from Westminster today about Russia. Indeed, if you go back to America and see what was being said about Soviet Russia in the 1920s and the 1930s and in the 1950s and the 1960s, once again, it's almost identical to what's coming out of America today concerning Russia. Now, regarding George Bush Jr., Barack Obama, and Donald Trump, were those three individuals sincere when they said they wanted to improve relations with Russia? No. We don't know. We really don't know. But what we do know, Peter, is this, that today, in 2019, because of Vladimir Putin's leadership, Russia is a superpower again. Russia is a resurgent force. And Americans know in Washington that Russia is not just the only country capable in the world of literally destroying America, but Russia is capable of limiting American expansionism, of defeating American aggression. Therefore, what we have seen in the last few years is just simply a continuation of great power rivalry between America and Russia. And remember, American generals and the hawks who support them, be it the conservatives or the liberals on Capitol Hill, they need an enemy in order to justify their defense budget, in order to justify placing more bases around the world, going into more countries. And what better country do they need to justify that defense budget than Russia?
But I think there's also another element here, Dima, is that this is a form of projection. Everything that they say Russia is doing in the world, they are doing themselves.
Exactly.
And I think that that's it's the inability to have any kind of self-reflection. I mean, we saw this with the political classes in the media as a result of the 2016 election of presidential and Brexit. It applies also in the UK. I mean, this is just a glorified form of projection. Marcus is absolutely right. It justifies the defense budgets. Okay, there's a material end of it, but there's a deep psychological thing because you project all of the negative things that you're doing onto someone else.
Absolutely, but I think now it's much worse than in the 19th century or even during the times of the Cold War.
The difference is that we have to define our terms. Great power politics. That's that's time immemorial. But now it's being ideology being weaponized.
Because this time one of the great powers, namely the United States and the EU, two of the great powers, believe that they represent a very progressive ideology that is destined to win, that has proven itself to be better than anything mankind has seen before. They are basically acting like the early Soviet Union, in the early 20th century. And about the enduring legacy of Russiagate, a few days ago, again, the headline in The Guardian, Russian hackers likely to target Florida again in 2020. And I was stunned to find out, what is interesting is that there is a Brennan Center for Justice, which is running an election reform in the United States. And here's a quote from one of their experts. Obviously, Florida will be a critical state in 2020, and Florida election officials should assume they will be targeted again, said Larry Norden, who professionally runs this election reform program.
But for our viewers, there's no evidence there was any meddling, Russian meddling in the Florida election in 2016.
I would refer our listeners, our viewers, to just a great conversation between Glenn Greenwald and Aaron Mate on YouTube.
Gray Zone, good.
Gray Zone. And in that, that is headlined very rightly, Russiagate skeptics are vindicated, but conspiracy theorists on Russiagate are rewarded. Let me remind our listeners that the New York Times got 2 Pulitzer Prizes for Russiagate, for actually writing about collusion between Trump and Russia, something that the Mueller report said never existed.
Our viewers should take a look, Google it about the New York Times editorial.
Just one fact, one interesting fact in this conversation between Greenwald and Aaron Mate. 15 former U.S. intelligence officials are now working as analysts at CNN and MSNBC. Not only James Clapper, who you rightly said is now hired by CNN. Also, Andrew McCabe. Also, talking about previous experiences, Jeffrey Goldberg, who was very important in spreading the lies that led to the Iraqi war about weapons of mass destruction, he is now lecturing us on Obama's foreign policy, you remember, in the Atlantic. So these people, there is complete impunity. These people who lied, who basically perjured themselves, like James Clapper perjured himself before the Congress. They are given positions in the media.
That goes back to my introduction, this two-tier justice system here, because we have someone like Jim Comey for now off the hook, but then you have like Papadopoulos and you have Mr. Stone, Roger Stone. I mean, it seems to be. I mean, what would be equitable when this is all said and done, if there's any kind of ending, is that Trump should give immunity to all these people, give a pardon to everyone, and get this behind us. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think Trump will weaponize Russiagate when he goes into the election because it's so many weaknesses there, which the Democrats built so much of their legitimacy on. So I think one key consequence of this will be they might as well be handing Trump 4 more years by following this strategy.
I absolutely agree. It's the deep state, it's Hollywood, it was academia, the media. They elected Donald Trump in 2016 by insulting half of the electorate, okay? And they're doing it again.
Yeah, and again, it's fact-free. It was a very good point. I think another Guardian article came out a week or 2 ago. It suggested that Trump's proposal to buy Greenland, that Putin had put him up to it. Again, this was in Guardian, and of course, needless to say, there's no evidence there. But even more important, there was no logic either. Like, why, God's green earth, would Vladimir Putin want Donald Trump to buy Greenland? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
The Washington Post wrote this week that it was Putin's mafia that helped Trump build his inadequate towers.
Hang on, we're running rapidly on out of time. We're going to go back to we'll go back to Marcus in London. I mean, this has a life of its own, and it seems to be part of the genetic code of many parts of the political left right now. It's just gospel right now because it unifies their side. Okay, it's a very important element that keeps their side of the aisle intact because you all have to be anti-Russian. That keeps them unified. It's a unifying element, unfortunately. Marcus, go ahead.
Look, Peter, as long as Russia remains the country it is today, an independent sovereign one, which will not bow down to America, then these accusations coming out of Washington will continue. God forbid that Russia ever has a leader like Mikhail Gorbachev or Boris Yeltsin again, then the accusations will stop. But very quickly, Dima, the Soviet Union was a Russian state and remains the most powerful Russian state in history. And secondly, to argue that it's worse today, what's coming out of America towards Russia, than it ever was untenable. You're forgetting McCarthyism. You're forgetting the Zinoviev letter. It really is a continuation of ingrained hostility in Washington and London.
It's very much part of the DNA, the political DNA of how they. Because
it's very interesting here. You know, very quick. You know, in this conversation by Greenwald and Mate, they wrote that we basically witnessing a repeat of the Cold War, when no one is allowed to advocate for better relations with Russia for fear of being accused an apologist for Russia or a Russian agent. But they rightly say that before it was the prerogative of conservatives accusing the Democrats and the liberals of being Russian agents. Now they flipped it completely. And just a small...
No, I want to give the last 30 seconds to Glenn. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, being a bit of an optimist, I thought maybe the end of Russiagate could have maybe changed the narratives a bit in the US, not because they, learned from their mistakes, but rather, yes, it's true that Russia's kind of been the other now for centuries. However, there's a new development which hasn't been around for centuries, and that's the rise of China. And obviously, it seems that America's waking up to the fact that China will be their main rival going forward. So, in lieu of that, I thought maybe they would start to rethink.
But see, Glenn, that's why you're an academic. Because you think logically and coherently.
It's my curse.
Don't expect that from politicians. That's all the time we have here. Many thanks to my guests here in Moscow and in London. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, crosstalk rules.